What if the stage you dreamed of became your eternal punishment? Tonight, we enter the story of a failed screenwriter trapped in his own personal hell. My entire life, I wanted to be a screenwriter. I dreamt of my work being published and brought to life on a stage in front of thousands. I would stay up for hours plotting what my breakout scene would be, how I'd take the world in my grasp, if but for one single hour a week. This dream stuck with me through marriage, stuck with me through kids. It tormented my mind every single day I went to work in the dead-end factory that was putting food on the table. It made me reclusive. I'd come home and lock myself in my office, where I spent hours mustering up what little energy I had to piece together something that would entertain people, bring a smile to a frowning face, anything that could show the world that I was still here, still thinking about them. Weeks were spent on a single scene from a single script. Finding hardly any breakout success, my wife grew exhausted and my children remained hungry. This will be the one, Bob, I'd tell her, hopeful. This will be the one that gets us out of here beautiful. Just trust me one last time. Then, one last time turned into another, then another. For 11 years, my wife waited ever so patiently for the one that never came. Everything came to a head when the youngest of our children developed leukemia. Gracie was 6 years old, and the diagnosis came like a bullet train piercing the hearts of both my wife and me. Cancer treatments were outrageously expensive, so much so that I had to take up another job just to cover each appointment. It pains me to write this. It tears me apart, even thinking that this is something that I've done and something that I must live with for the rest of my life. Working 2 full-time jobs drained everything out of me. I would leave work, exhausted, only to clock back in at my new job as a pathetic shoe salesman for a 5-hour shift in the mall. I tried to tell myself it was worth it. I fought with myself every single day with evil thoughts, daring me to do what lies just beneath my subconscious. I couldn't cope with not being able to do what I loved. I simply could not deal with knowing that my daughter was pulling me away from what I truly wanted in this life. While at work in the factory one day, I intentionally lowered a loading ramp onto my foot and heard the crushing of bones within my shoes. Every bone in my foot had been shattered, and the company saw very clearly on the cameras that I had done it on purpose. I was fired after being sent to the hospital to have my foot put in a cast. Losing our main source of income, my wife now had to go find work to keep our daughter on treatment. I was so deeply ashamed. I couldn't bring myself to look in the mirror or at my daughter. I watched as my wife slaved away while I remained locked in my office, healing from the work injury. My second child, Joseph, grew somewhat reclusive himself. Being 13, it wasn't abnormal for Joey to retreat to his own room for hours on end. Adolescent hormones, mixed with the state of his sister, kept him locked away, immersed in his music and video games. This didn't seem like a problem to me, however, because I, for one, was happy to have the space, happy to be able to feel immersed in my own craft. My wife would come home from the hospital or from a long shift to find the house completely silent, completely and utterly empty. I wouldn't have watched it leave my office until well into the night, when I was delighted that a scene was perfect, and Joseph only left his room to grab a snack from the pantry. This drove a great wedge between my family and me. My wife picked up a nasty drinking habit, sometimes pouring herself a glass of wine before her day even started. Intimacy didn't exist between us. We were strangers in the same bed, essentially, and the glue that held us together was melting. What kept us both running was my daughter. Somewhere along the line, I found the strength to see her face again, to put my dreams and shame aside and visit my dying baby for Christ's sake. I'd limp into the hospital room on crutches to be greeted with the devastating sight of my sweet girl withering away in her bed. She was rail-thin and graying, and her pitch-black curly hair had crumpled and fallen away from her scalp. I would stroke her face, and she'd press her tiny little hands against mine, holding them firmly against her cheek. So many tears were shed in that hospital room. Seeing her in such a state revitalized my energy, and I began writing with purpose, with an undying willingness to do what it takes to get my daughter back into the arms of health. Scene by scene, brick by brick, I wrote until my fingers felt like stubs at the end of my hands. With the ferocity of a Spartan and the grace of a figure skater, I printed words on paper like my life depended on it. For weeks I continued this venture, praying to God that maybe, one of the prompts would stick. Maybe a monologue could bring a tear to a viewer's eye, bring laughter from their throats. And yet, no success was found. My wife eventually caught on that I wasn't just healing anymore, and that I was intentionally avoiding work that could save my daughter. She demanded a divorce immediately and broke down entirely, sobbing about how much of her life she had wasted on such a pathetic fucking loser. A wannabe, a fucking admirer of art. Her drinking had grown almost completely out of control, and by this point, I'd noticed her snagging a few cigarettes too, a filthy habit that I had told her needed to be broken right after we started dating in high school. She began periodically moving her things out day after day between trips to the hospital and work. For the first time in weeks, I actually heard Joey's voice, quiet cries that came from beyond his door that he tried to stifle. I'd try to talk to him and find it evident that he wanted nothing to do with me. Between this and my wife being in the process of removing every trace of herself in the household, I too began to drink. I'd throw back one shot after the other before locking myself in my dark office, illuminated by only my laptop screen. The house became quiet and desolate. My ex-wife would occasionally come bursting into my office, spouting off about how much of a piece of shit I was and how much she hated me and so forth. A new silence became deafening when my daughter died, though. The whole world seemed to fall silent. I'd visited her 6 fucking times. 6 times. The last time I'd seen her, she could barely move. Her cancer became unresponsive to treatments, and she slipped away soon after. My ex-wife didn't cry at the funeral. She remained stone-faced through the sounds of our grieving friends and loved ones. Joey, on the other hand, sobbed uncontrollably. His wails echoed through the funeral parlor and into the parking lot and continued all the way through the burial and through the night. My wife was gone. My daughter was gone. I graduated from alcohol to painkillers and drifted into a state of numbness for several months. You'd think that after the death of one child I'd have learned from my mistakes. I'd have begged God for forgiveness and dedicated my life to my last remaining son. But I didn't. I remained closed off in my office, writing and submitting, getting drunk and high to numb my pain. I weaved stories out of my daughter's passing, making a spectacle of her and my emotional state, begging for approval from strangers. I created female characters within those stories, depicting my ex-wife as a drunken hag who left when her dying daughter and crippled husband needed her most. I even created stories out of my son's seclusion from the world and turned his pain into something to be gawked at by thousands, all from behind the closed door of my office. I don't even know how much time passed behind that door, though it felt as if weeks had melted away from underneath me. I know that I didn't hear from Joey or my ex-wife anymore. I know that I was blessed with the serenity of a free space to completely envelop myself in. I'd take 2 Vicodin and wash 'em down with bourbon before sitting down to write something. And it wasn't just once a day, I'd write multiple times a day, popping pill after pill and downing shot after shot, spilling my heart out onto an empty canvas. One day, while writing and repeating the process, once I washed down my 6th Vicodin of the day, my vision became blurry and pinpointed. I could no longer feel my legs, and I gasped for air as I fell to the ground and blacked out. I awoke in a theater. It was dark, and the entire theater was empty apart from the seat directly to my left. I felt leering dread overcome me as I slowly turned my head to greet the dark presence that I felt before me. I found my ex-wife, wine glass in hand. Her white blouse was stained with vomit and red wine, and her eyes and skin were a sickly yellow. Her hair was straggly and manged, and she smiled drunkenly with her eyes glued to the stage. I opened my mouth to speak to her, but she cut me off with a soft shh. The show's about to start. It was about to. As if on cue, spotlights lit up the stage, and I saw my little girl dance to its center in her cute little tutu and pink leotard. Life had returned to her, and she danced with such amazing grace and divinity that tears began to sting my eyes. My wife clapped and cheered drunkenly, and I watched as my daughter's movements became more and more jagged. Her grace had ceased, and it now looked as if she were glitching across the stage. I was stunned with horror. As with each step she took, my daughter deteriorated more and more. The skin on her bones tightened, revealing her rib cage and pelvis through her leotard. Her eyes became dark and hollow, and her cheeks sank to her teeth. I watched as her hair blew away like sand in the wind with each twirl. My ex-wife took a big swig from her glass of wine before calling out, "Encore! That's it, baby. Give your father what he wants." My daughter took one last leap, and I sat stunned as her right leg turned to crumbling ash as she landed upon it. Knocking her off balance, she tried to catch herself, and as her palm connected with the stage floor, it too turned to ash. Lying there on her back atop that stage, my daughter's chest began to rise and fall rapidly with heaving, rattling breaths, each one getting weaker than the last, until finally she disappeared completely into a pile of smoldering ash as my wife cheered on with ecstatic excitement. The spotlight shut off, shrouding the room in darkness as my wife screamed for an encore. There was silence for a few moments before the spotlight glowed back to life and revealed my son standing atop the stage light rafter. His eyes were red and exhausted, and his cheeks shone with sleek, wet tears. "This one's for you, Dad," he squeaked before fastening a cord from one of the lights snugly around his neck. "No," I screamed, jumping from my seat. But it was too late. Joey had jumped, snapping his neck and pulling a string of stage lights down with him, each one clattering and sparking against the stage. A spark caught the curtain, and the entire stage went ablaze while my son lay limp on the floor. My wife howled with joy as the fire raged, enveloping Joey and the front row seats. She threw her head back, cackling maniacally as the flames drew closer and closer. The entire theater soon became blanketed with burning, blistering flames that melted the skin away from my wife as she stood cheering for another encore. I do believe this is hell, and I do believe it's been patented for me. The artist who threw his family away like nothing to chase a dream that also meant absolutely nothing. I hope my daughter's spirit lives on somewhere out there, right alongside my wife and son. I hope that this punishment is mine to bear alone, and for what it's all worth. I would stay here, being eaten alive by flames for all of eternity if it meant you three prospered. I am so deeply sorry.